Hey guys, welcome back to the show. This episode is dedicated to UFC 217 pay-per-view at Madison Square Garden in New York. It's taking place on Saturday, November 4th, and we're going to give you some preview coverage on it. We got Pat back on the table for this one. He's going to go through some of the pre-card matches, and we're going to both talk a little more in depth about the main events.
Yeah, so every time the UFC goes to MSG, they always bring a giant card. And this one is no different. It's stacked top to bottom. I mean, on the prelims on cable, you have Mickey Gall fighting, who everybody remembers from beating up CM Punk. You got Ovince St. Preux versus Corey Anderson, a real fun light heavyweight match. You got your fight that I'm most excited for on the prelim card, which is James Vick versus Joe Duffy, who is famous for his being one of the last two people to defeat Conor McGregor in MMA. Obviously, Nate Diaz is the last one. Moving on to the main card, it starts with Johnny Hendricks versus Paulo Costa. Don't know much about Costa. I know he's a striker, but Johnny Hendricks has been in a bit of a slump lately. I understand he's on the main card because he's a big name, former welterweight champion, almost beat GSP. A lot of people think he did, but after missing weight a bunch of times, they forced him to go up to middleweight. He had one good showing against Hector Lombard and has kind of been in a slump ever since, so it's kind of an interesting fight. I kind of expect Hendricks to be on the losing end here, even though he's predicting that with his camp change to the famed Jackson Winklejohn MMA that he will be unbeatable within a year. I've seen him lose too many times recently to believe that statement. But moving on, we got Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Jorge Masvidal, which is a real fun fight. Jorge Masvidal recently knocked out Donald Cerrone. Then he went on for a title elimination match against Damian Maia. Came up short in that, but was able to survive the full 5 rounds, which is very admirable against possibly the greatest jiu-jitsu player to ever be in MMA, versus Wonderboy Thompson, who has basically demolished everyone not named Tyron Woodley in the past couple years. That is 2 title shots. They're both boring fights. I think it's just a bad matchup for both of them. One's real careful. One is not quite aggressive enough. But after that, we get on to the 3 championship fights.
Yeah, so should we talk about the middleweight first?
The main event? Why not?
Yeah, let's get right in the main event. We got the middleweight championship on the line. Michael Bisping, the champion, and returning after a long hiatus, or even retirement, you could call it, is George St. Pierre. And, my prediction for this is a retaining of the title by Bisping. It's just, my logic behind it is honestly the fact that anytime in sports, doesn't matter whether it's fighting or some other type of sport, when someone retires and they come back years later, they almost always are shittier. Now, I know that St. Pierre's been talking up how, oh yeah, I've been like hardcore training, I'm like the best I've ever been, but like I don't really buy it. I think what's also interesting about the fight, though, is that, like, to me, it's like a really clear face versus heel. I think the champion is totally like the heel here. He's cocky, like he's just a cocky guy, and like is trying to like intimidate St. Pierre, and like St. Pierre, I think it's like gonna be more the fan favorite here. But what do you think about it?
It's definitely an interesting fight. George St. Pierre coming back after 5 years. There's a lot of questions. You know, it's. Does he have the same endurance to do what he typically does to people, which he's a guy who he is really good at timing his takedowns and getting people down and holding them down for the most part and just grinding people out. And that is a really, really taxing way to fight someone, especially someone like Bisping, who is notoriously hard to keep down. There's been some people who were able to get him down, like Chael Sonnen and Tim Kennedy, who were able to take him down, but they were never really able to hold him down. He never ends up on the bottom taking a lot of shots. So it's an interesting style matchup for George St. Pierre, definitely. And I think that after watching his last fight against Johnny Hendricks and how many shots he took and how much trouble he had getting Hendricks down, I think that Bisping is a much better boxer than Hendricks. He has much better movement. He's much higher output. He's not known as a power puncher, but he is a bigger dude than GSP is typically faced in the octagon. So I think with Michael Bisping being the cardio monster that he is and having such good boxing and movement, if GSP doesn't come back and have some sort of substantial improvement from his last fight, I don't see many ways for him to win. I might have to side with you here and go Bisping for the retention.
Well, I definitely expect Bisping to be the more aggressive, high-energy fighter coming into this. St. Pierre to me is like he's more of a technician from what I can tell. But again, I don't even want to try to analyze it too deep. I'm just looking from the perspective of you got a guy that's come out of retirement after years he's been away from the sport. Now, he has been training. It's not like he's been sitting on the couch the entire time.
Yeah.
He's been training hard for this fight. And he is hungry as the challenger, and he even said that, hey, it's different, being the challenger and being the champion, and I get that. But again, I think the odds are just much more in favor of a champion that's, been actively fighting versus a guy that's been out of it a couple of years.
Yeah, that is the biggest question, I think, is GSP coming back. What does he look like? Where's his mind at? He left because he was sick of the pressure of being the champion. It was starting to get to him. He wasn't performing as well. His head wasn't in as much, even though his body was still performing well. He didn't have any major injuries, but it's just, you saw him start to struggle a little more. He was still winning all of his fights, but like they said on the countdown show, the margin that he won by was just getting smaller and smaller every time. I understand why he's coming back, and I think it's very admirable, particularly what he's doing. He's trying to cement his legacy as the greatest fighter of all time. He's trying to become the 4th fighter in UFC history to be a 2-weight champion, which is not an easy thing to do, particularly against somebody who such a grizzled veteran in Michael Bisping, who has the most fights and the most wins in UFC history. He's had 20-something fights in the UFC, which is absurd.
So where do these guys match up as far as their age? Are they both in their 30s or?
Yeah, they're both late 30s. I think they're both. GSP is probably 37, 38. Bisping, I think, is 39. So definitely both on the tail ends of their career.
Very interesting. Very interesting. But again, my whole thing is, not just fighting, but any sport, you retire, you come back. I mean, think about the NFL and Marshawn Lynch. He's not doing so hot. It's very hard to come back after a long retirement and be better than you were before, which is what he's claiming, by the way. He's claiming he's better than he was before.
Yeah, and I mean he's one of those guys who, even when he was training, he did it in the best way possible. He's one of the first people to go about it in a way where he incorporated a lot of sports science into what he was doing, where he used heart monitors and all these things, and hired a plethora of different trainers to monitor everything he was doing, and he comes out of one of the best camps in the game with one of the top 3 or 4 best head coaches in the country, I would say, in Faraz Sahabi. And he trained with Freddie Roach, who's one of the best boxing coaches you can get. He trains with John Danaher, who is a jiu-jitsu mastermind, training some of the best jiu-jitsu practitioners in the game right now, particularly Gary Tonin. But so yes, while he's claiming he's a better version, and looking at his coaching and knowing how well he trained and how smart he is about his game, it's not impossible, but it certainly doesn't seem to be, to me, that it would be the most likely outcome of having a huge improvement from what he used to be.
Yeah, but I will say, if he does manage to win, look out. I mean, it's going to do wonders for his career. That's going to be legendary stuff. He comes back after this long break and then wins the championship.
Yeah, and he's claiming that he has a plan for the rest of his career, and it starts with beating Bisping, and he says that if he doesn't beat Bisping, he's going to retire. But outside of that, he has a 3-fight plan. I'd be real interested to see what it is. I mean, I have a guess. I would say he's probably going to fight Bisping. I don't see him sticking around middleweight. The rest of those dudes are monsters. I don't see him fighting a Chris Weidman or a Yoel Romero or even a Luke Rockhold or Robert Whittaker, who's the interim middleweight champion. I see him probably going down, trying to take the welterweight title back and getting it for the 3rd time, trying to beat Tyron Woodley, and then maybe he's one of the biggest names in UFC history. It wouldn't seem infeasible to me for him to try to go down and set up a super fight with Conor McGregor at lightweight and become the first ever 3-weight UFC champion and have one of the biggest fights of all time.
Sounds like storybook stuff there. I guess we're going to have to see what actually happens.
Yeah, it's a lot of hopes on that one.
That brings us into our next main event fight, which is Cody Garbrandt versus TJ Dillashaw for the Bantamweight Championship. And these guys have a bit of a history going back. I mean, I think of the 3 main event fights, these guys have the most intense rivalry, which is what makes it really interesting to me. My prediction is that, again, the champion retains the title. I got Garbrandt winning this. But what's your take?
I definitely agree with you. They have the most history out of all of them. They're former teammates. They both used to be on the team Alpha Male under in Uriah Faber's gym. They trained together for years, and then they hired head coach Duane Ludwig a couple years back. TJ and Duane hit it off and became a pretty absurdly good team together. We saw TJ take leaps and bounds under the tutelage of Duane Ludwig and his Bang Muay Thai system. And that's where TJ gets his interesting stand-up style, which looks a lot like the person who we saw Cody Garbrandt take the title from, Dominic Cruz. To hear it told, he developed his new style by trying to imitate Dominic Cruz for other teammates while their team has been trying to fight him. They have a grand total of 27 rounds fought against Dominic Cruz, trying to beat him for years and years with different people, and TJ decided to leave with Duane. Duane Ludwig decided to move to Colorado, and TJ wanted to leave to go train with Duane and still try to come back and train with Alpha Male whenever he could, and they weren't too happy about it, and so there's a little bit of bad blood between them. So yeah, they have a history, and it's an interesting rivalry. To hear it told, they didn't really get along very well when they were both at the camp to start with, but it's only gotten worse from there, especially after the season of The Ultimate Fighter that they coached against each other, and the recent release of the famed knockout video from the gym where Garbrandt claimed to have knocked TJ out, and TJ has vehemently denied it for years. Just watched it a little bit ago, and it looks like a pretty solid drop to me. Maybe not out cold, but he definitely caught him. But this is for me is the hardest fight to call on the card. You can see it going a couple different ways. Garbrandt is definitely the more power puncher in the pocket. He throws better close-up boxing combinations. He definitely hits harder with his hands.
And if I'm not mistaken, he's undefeated in MMA, right?
Yeah, he is undefeated. And not only that, but on his way up through the UFC, I think he's knocked out every person he's fought. He just steamrolls people. It's pretty crazy to watch. You watch him fight Thomas Almeida, a Brazilian kid who's a really excellent Muay Thai practitioner and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, and he ran through Thomas Almeida in the first half of the first round. He did the same with Takeya Mitsugaki. He put out the challenge to himself that he wanted to beat Dominic Cruz's record for beating Takeya Mitsugaki, where he knocked him out in 60 seconds. Garbrandt challenged himself to beat that time and did it in, I think, 45 seconds? Something like that. So he's just been steamrolling everyone he's come across, and it's going to be real interesting to see if he does the same.
Well, so
here.
why are you a little hesitant to make a call here as far as who's going to win? You got on one side an undefeated champ that knocks everyone out. What makes you think Dillashaw's got a good shot here? Is it just the fact that it's a intense rivalry and it changes the composure maybe going into the fight, or is it more technical than that?
A little bit. The rivalry definitely plays into it. Both of these guys are really, really professional, and they tend not to bring their emotions into the ring or to the octagon with them. It's not gonna affect how they would fight too much. But I'm hesitant because the style matchup is really interesting. I've seen Dillashaw put on some of the craziest performances. When Dillashaw took the title from Renan Barão, who was on the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world list, just behind Jose Aldo, it was pretty crazy. It was one of the most impressive performances and one of the best executed game plans I've ever seen in my life. And then he came back and was even more impressive in the rematch. And TJ Dillashaw has been in the UFC for so long and has just been fighting the top 3, 4, 5 guys in the world for years and years. And if you look at his record and compare his resume of fights against Cody Garbrandt's, I think with the exception that Garbrandt beat Dominic Cruz, there's no question that TJ Dillashaw has the better resume. He's been facing the higher level competition for so long, and I can't count him out. It's his if he executes a good game plan and is able to keep it at a longer range than Garbrandt typically fights, I think that he has a very, very good chance of winning this fight. that for me is the big question, though, is he able to keep it at that range and be able to be effective and move out of the way? I mean, we saw Garbrandt deal with the movement of Dominic Cruz, who used to move a lot better than even Dillashaw does now. He looked a little slower and a little less, in motion in his recent fight against Garbrandt, but Garbrandt was able to deal with it. Not only that, but he made Dominic Cruz look pretty foolish in that fight. Danced on him and stuff. It was very entertaining. So, I don't know.
So pretty even matchup here from your perspective then.
Yeah, definitely. I think it really comes down to the game plan that Dillashaw uses and how well he executes. I rewatched his fight against John Moraga, who's outside of Cody Garbrandt's the heaviest puncher in the division, and Dillashaw kind of went with a game plan where he definitely kept his distance. He threw a lot of kicks, which Moraga caught and was able to take him down, which is another bad thing about Garbrandt. Garbrandt's a much better wrestler than Moraga is, so if he throws a lot of kicks, Garbrandt's going to be able to catch him and use him to get takedowns, or at least to get an advantageous position, push him up against the cage, keep it closer in range where he can land those big power shots and those good combinations. And if TJ does what he did against Moraga, where he kind of throws one-off pot shots from a long way away to try to keep him at bay, then it might be a bad night for him, because if he throws that one shot and isn't able to get out of there quick enough, Cody Garbrandt just blitzes you. He just runs in and throws a bunch of really quick shots. I think he's faster than TJ Dillashaw, so if I have to pick, I might have to agree. I think that Dillashaw may not be able to keep him at range for the entire fight, and Garbrandt might be able to get in and get land that one big power shot. But I think if it goes the distance, that by the fourth and fifth round, which is what we saw in Dillashaw's fight against Dominic Cruz, he'll start to figure him out and start to outpoint him in those later rounds. So it's a question of how the first 2 or 3 go.
Yeah. So, so far I got both champions retaining, and that leads us into our other main event fight, which is the women's strawweight championship. We have Joanne versus Namajunas. And for that one, again, I've got the champion retaining, although I will admit this one I'm a little less sure on, because we've got 2 fighters that are both coming into this with a ton of momentum, I feel like. I feel like the challenger comes into this showing improvement from fight to fight and just a really strong showing coming into this, but we know what the champion's capable of. So what's your take on this?
This one for me is a very fun fight in my 2 favorite fighters in that division, easily. But it's the easiest for me to call, I think. I think that Joanne Jędrzejczyk is just too good. Her striking is so high level that no one's been able to deal with it yet. Rose put on a very good performance in her last couple of fights, particularly against Michelle Watterson, who is herself is a striker, who is known for having really good kicks and being a good grappler, but Rose Namajunas kicked her in the head so hard she left her feet, and then after she was down, she took the back and choked her out. And it was an incredible performance, but
I think we were both at your house watching that fight, too.
I think so, and I think it was one of those jump out of your seat moments of, holy crap, like when that kick landed, it was just absurd. Like the smacking sound, you see her feet leave the canvas, and when she hit, it was just a loud thud, and I couldn't believe it at the time. But Joanne Jędrzejczyk has just been so unstoppable. She's going to tie Ronda Rousey's record for women's title defenses. She's going for her 7th title defense. She has the same number of title wins in the UFC as Ronda Rousey, but because Rousey was given the belt since she was the champion of a different organization, she was given the belt when she came in instead of having to earn it in her first fight. So same number of title wins, but she's going for the 7th defense to tie the record for women. And I don't see many people beating Joanne Jędrzejczyk. I think that if Rose does stand a chance, it's going to be in a scramble. I think maybe later in the fight, Joanna does not make many mistakes. She doesn't do many lazy things in striking or in the clinch or in the scrambles, but Rose is absurdly good in those scrambling moments, at taking someone's back and just getting into a grappling exchange where she has the advantage. And I think that she probably does have the advantage in grappling over Joanna, but I don't see it being a very easy road to get to that point.
Yeah, I think she's going to have to find a way to avoid the power shots, like not take any strong strikes, and I think that's going to put her in the best shot to really come up with the upset victory. But yeah, I mean, like again, I just like all the champions on this pay-per-view. Honestly, I think they're all very aggressive. They're all very strong strikers, and I think that puts them in a great chance to retain their titles.
Definitely, and that's one of the things that makes this fight card so much fun is that it is all of the strikers, you know, and that's what most people like to watch is they like to watch two people just duke it out, or, you know, in the case of the co-main and the female championship, there's a bunch of really good technicians, and they're going to be real fun fights to watch. I'm very much excited. So I think we both agree that all the champions are probably going to retain their belts. So we'll see how it actually turns out on fight night. I can't wait.
Yeah. So go ahead and leave us a comment. Let us know who you think are winning all the fights. We want to hear your opinion too. Make sure to like the video and subscribe, and stay tuned. We're going to keep coming out with more sports videos, pay-per-view previews, and recaps like this. Thanks for joining me, Pat. It's been good having you on again.
Thank you.
And yeah, everybody, subscribe to LitTube. See you around.
Without sounding like a dumbass.
How dare you call cut, sir? I call cut, sir.
I'm the director, goddammit.
That's what I gotta do!